It was supposed to be a routine day at the military base. Chuck Norris, dressed casually in a fitted black jacket and jeans, had arrived to observe a training session. Cameras from the press were stationed at a safe distance, and high-ranking officers walked briskly through the compound, giving orders and checking reports. Chuck moved quietly, observing the drills, nodding politely to the soldiers as they passed. To everyone there, he looked like a visitor, a civilian, someone respectful, calm, and composed. But not everyone saw him that way. A high-ranking general, known for his temper and strict discipline, glanced toward Chuck. He squinted, misinterpreting Chuck's calm demeanor as defiance. Perhaps it was the way Chuck's eyes followed the soldiers' movements, or maybe it was just a bad day for the general. Whatever it was, the general's pride wouldn't allow him to hesitate. Without warning, the general strode over, his face flushed with authority. In one swift motion, he grabbed Chuck by the hair. The crowd froze. Gasps erupted. Soldiers stopped mid-step. Even the press cameras shook slightly as the moment played out in real time. Chuck didn't struggle. He didn't yell. Instead, he stood perfectly still, every muscle relaxed but ready. His piercing gaze met the general's, and for a fraction of a second, the world seemed to hold its breath. The general's grip was tight, his arrogance palpable. He smirked, thinking he had full control over the situation. "You think you can just walk in here and observe without permission?" he barked, voice echoing through the compound. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. They'd never seen someone challenge the general so subtly and with such calm. Chuck finally spoke, his voice low but commanding, almost like a quiet storm before a lightning strike. "I am here to watch, not to interfere. There is no need for this hostility." His tone wasn't begging. It wasn't angry. It was firm, measured, and intelligent. The general, momentarily thrown by Chuck's calm defiance, tightened his grip, trying to assert dominance. But Chuck's eyes told a story, one of experience, confidence, and a silent warning. The next move would be decisive, and it wouldn't come from anger. No one knew what Chuck would do next, and the room froze in disbelief. The tension in the air was palpable. Every soldier, officer, and visitor in the compound sensed it. This was no ordinary confrontation. Something extraordinary was about to unfold, and everyone present, even the general, had no idea how powerful the next moment would be. The atmosphere in the military compound had shifted instantly. The air, once filled with the quiet hum of training exercises and the soft clatter of boots on concrete, now seemed thick, almost suffocating. Every eye turned toward the center of the yard where Chuck Norris stood, unexpectedly grabbed by the hair of a furious general. Soldiers froze mid-step. Cameras shook slightly in the hands of reporters, and even the distant whir of helicopters overhead seemed to vanish. Chuck didn't move a muscle. His jaw was set, his gaze steady. While the general's grip remained tight, Chuck's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the general's aggression, creating an almost surreal tension that no one could ignore. There was a magnetic pull in the moment, an invisible line of energy that held the crowd captive, making them want to lean in to see how this would play out. The general, puffing with authority, leaned closer and barked, "Do you even know who you're talking to?" His voice was sharp, cracking slightly under his own adrenaline. Soldiers exchanged glances, unsure if they should intervene. The general had a reputation for being unpredictable, and challenging him directly had often ended badly for anyone who dared. Chuck spoke in a calm, commanding tone. "I am here as a visitor. I am observing. There is no reason for aggression." His words didn't carry fear. They carried weight, subtle but unmistakable authority. The general's smirk faltered for the briefest moment, replaced by something like irritation or confusion. How could someone remain this composed while under direct physical control? By now, whispers began spreading through the crowd. "Who is he? Why isn't he reacting? He doesn't seem afraid." Even some of the junior officers dared to murmur quietly, "That's Chuck Norris, isn't it?" But their whispers were half-formed, uncertain. Nobody wanted to speak too loudly and risk the general noticing. The general, noticing the whispers but unwilling to show that they affected him, gripped Chuck's hair even tighter. "Answer me. Who do you think you are?" Chuck remained still, taking a deliberate, measured breath before responding. "I'm just here to watch. I'm not here to argue. I suggest you consider your actions carefully." The words carried more than meaning. They carried an unspoken warning. Every person watching could feel it. Chuck was not just calm, he was calculating, and the next move could completely change the situation. The general, blinded by pride, failed to realize that Chuck's restraint was strategic, not fear. As the tension mounted, several bystanders quietly raised their phones, recording the interaction. The camera lenses captured everything: the furious general, the unwavering visitor, and the charged atmosphere that made everyone's heart race. The soldiers knew that this footage could spread quickly. Somewhere in the world, someone would see this moment, and it would leave them stunned. Chuck's family, who had been waiting discreetly nearby, noticed the escalating aggression. Concern painted their faces. A close friend tried to step forward. "Chuck, maybe we should leave. This isn't worth it," they whispered. Chuck shook his head ever so slightly. He would not back down, not because of pride, but because the moment demanded integrity and composure. Retreating would send the wrong signal, not just to the general, but to every witness, every soldier, every civilian watching. The general, growing impatient and desperate to assert dominance, barked out more threats. "Do you think I will let you humiliate me in front of everyone?" He leaned closer, trying to intimidate Chuck by lowering his body and raising his voice. But Chuck, unflinching, raised his eyes calmly to meet the general's. His gaze was so intense that a shiver ran through some of the bystanders. It was a look that said, "I know exactly what I'm doing, and you are about to regret underestimating me." Now the whispers in the crowd grew louder. "It is Chuck Norris," someone finally exclaimed under their breath. "The Chuck Norris?" A ripple ran through the audience. Phones shifted, more cameras aimed at him, and a buzz of excitement started to fill the air. Yet, the general remained unaware, his ego shielding him from realizing who he had challenged. Chuck finally broke the silence. His voice was quiet but carried effortlessly across the tense courtyard. "Strength is not shown by force, but by restraint. Respect is earned, not demanded." The general blinked, taken aback for just a second. That was enough for the crowd to notice the crack in his armor. Some soldiers exchanged looks of disbelief. Chuck was turning the situation mentally, not physically. The general's aggression was being countered by calm, intelligence, and presence alone. Where are you watching from? Type your country or city in the comments. Let us know who is witnessing this insane showdown in real time. As Chuck subtly shifted his weight, the general's grip loosened slightly, not because Chuck had moved aggressively, but because the confidence in his stance disarmed the tension. Every person watching felt their hearts racing. Even those trained in military discipline realized that this was no ordinary confrontation. Something extraordinary was unfolding right before their eyes. The scene was now fully charged. A furious general, a calm but unyielding Chuck Norris, dozens of onlookers frozen mid-action, and cameras capturing every flicker of emotion. The stakes weren't just physical. They were mental, emotional, and strategic. The audience watching the video later would feel the same tension, suspense, and awe as the people present that day. And yet, the biggest shock was still coming. Chuck's next move, the one that would leave the general, the soldiers, and every onlooker stunned, was about to be revealed. The courtyard felt like it had shrunk. Every person present seemed to be holding their breath. Chuck Norris stood perfectly still, the faintest hint of a calm smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The general's hand remained on his hair, but it was no longer the controlling gesture it had been a few minutes ago. Chuck's unwavering composure radiated power without aggression, and everyone, soldiers, press, and staff alike, could sense it. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Is that Chuck Norris?" one young officer muttered to a colleague. The colleague's jaw dropped. "The Chuck Norris?" Others began piecing it together, realizing the quiet man under the general's grasp was a living legend, the man who had defied impossible odds on the battlefield, in the octagon, and in Hollywood. Yet the general remained oblivious, his pride blinding him. He barked, "Do you think your fame intimidates me?" His voice carried a mixture of anger and disbelief. Chuck, still calm, merely met his gaze, the silence between them loaded with unspoken tension. It was a battle of wills, a chess match in real time. The general's mind raced. He was strong, authoritative, accustomed to control, but he had never encountered someone who didn't respond with fear, someone whose calm itself was powerful enough to unnerve him. Around them, the crowd was now fully engaged. Soldiers whispered nervously to one another, some moving their cameras closer to capture the moment, others instinctively stepping back. Every phone in the courtyard now pointed at Chuck, silently recording. Even the photographers, trained to stay impartial, could not conceal their awe. Chuck's mind, however, was calm and precise. He was not planning a physical retaliation because that was unnecessary. The general's aggression was fueled by ego, not reason, and ego could be dismantled without violence. Chuck allowed the general to overcommit to his own arrogance, letting tension build. The more the general tried to assert dominance, the more the audience perceived Chuck as unshakable, almost untouchable. His family, quietly observing from a safe distance, felt the anxiety in the air. They glanced at each other, their eyes wide with fear and concern. Chuck's closest friend tried to interject. "Chuck, maybe it's time to let it go. He's unstable." Chuck shook his head slightly, a small, deliberate motion. Retreat would signal weakness. No, this moment demanded patience, clarity, and strategic restraint. The general, frustrated by Chuck's silence, grew reckless. "You are in my command," he shouted, tightening his grip, raising his voice so that it echoed off the courtyard walls. But Chuck did not flinch. His calmness was like a mirror reflecting the general's rage back at him. Every gesture, every look subtly undermined the general's authority without a single strike being thrown, that if you were in Chuck's shoes, what would your first move be? Comment below. Don't hold back. We want to see your strategies. The crowd's reaction intensified. Some spectators whispered in disbelief. "I've never seen anyone handle someone like that." Others were visibly shaking their heads, mouths slightly open, unable to comprehend the control Chuck exhibited under direct threat. The tension became almost tangible, a heavy weight pressing down on everyone's shoulders. Chuck's internal dialogue was quiet, disciplined. Let him overcommit. Let him reveal his arrogance. Let the world see the difference between force and strategy. Every step the general took, every shout, only strengthened Chuck's position. The crowd subconsciously began rooting for him, not because of fame or celebrity, but because his restraint symbolized integrity, power, and patience, qualities the audience admired instinctively. Now, the general started pacing, unsure how to break Chuck's composure. His red-faced aggression clashed with Chuck's serene presence, and the imbalance was becoming painfully obvious to everyone. Even some of the general's loyal officers exchanged uncertain glances. Something had shifted. The general was no longer fully in control. The whispers became louder. Someone in the back muttered, "This is insane. He isn't even fighting back." And the general looks terrified. Others nodded, their eyes glued to Chuck. Phones continued to record, capturing the surreal moment when calmness and strategy completely outclassed brute aggression. Meanwhile, Chuck subtly adjusted his posture, not as a challenge, but as a statement. He exuded confidence, patience, and intelligence. The crowd sensed it, felt it, and instinctively leaned closer, both physically and mentally, drawn into the unfolding drama. Every second, every heartbeat, added to the suspense. The general finally snapped verbally. "Do you realize who you're dealing with?" Chuck's gaze softened slightly, almost pitying, and his words cut through the tension like a sharp blade, calm but undeniable. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, and I also know exactly what is necessary here. Respect is not forced. It is earned, and fear is never respect." The courtyard fell silent. Every person present felt the weight of those words. Some nodded slowly. Others stared, wide-eyed, unable to process the sheer mental dominance displayed. Chuck wasn't just resisting. The energy he radiated commanded awe, fear, and admiration all at once. It was clear. The next move would either crush the general's ego completely or change everything in the room. The anticipation built to a fever pitch. Soldiers, officers, press, everyone was now waiting, trapped mentally and emotionally, hearts pounding, phones recording, eyes fixed. No one could predict what would happen next, and that uncertainty made the moment almost unbearable. The courtyard was tense, silent except for the faint murmur of whispers. Chuck Norris remained perfectly still, the general's hand still awkwardly gripping his hair, but the balance of power had subtly shifted. The general's anger had grown, but so had the crowd's awareness. Everyone could feel it. Something was about to break. Then, a young officer, barely out of training, leaned over to a colleague and whispered so only a few could hear, "Wait, that's Chuck Norris." The words spread slowly at first, like a ripple in water, then exploded. "Chuck Norris?" someone exclaimed from across the courtyard. "The Chuck Norris?" More murmurs followed. "The legend? The one who's unstoppable. The actor, the fighter, the hero." Suddenly, the whispers became voices, and the voices became gasps. The crowd realized that the man standing calmly, letting a furious general overreach with his aggression, was no ordinary visitor. He was someone whose reputation had preceded him, a figure synonymous with skill, discipline, and untouchable confidence. Yet the general remained oblivious, his ego acting like a blindfold. "Who's talking about him?" he barked, his voice cracking with frustration. His attempts to assert authority were futile. Chuck, calm and composed, made no move to assert fame. He didn't need to. His presence alone commanded attention. The whispers grew louder, spreading through the courtyard. Phones were raised higher, cameras zooming in, recording the surreal scene. The onlookers' faces reflected a mix of awe, disbelief, and growing admiration. Some laughed quietly, shaking their heads. Others held their mouths open, stunned that someone could maintain such control under direct aggression. Chuck's calm demeanor had turned into something almost magnetic. The tension was no longer about fear, it was about respect. Every subtle movement he made, every unspoken message in his eyes, radiated power and self-control. Even without raising a hand, he was winning. His family, watching from a safe distance, whispered nervously among themselves. "Is it really him?" his wife asked, eyes wide. His friends nodded, barely daring to breathe, aware that the moment was larger than life. Chuck gave them a reassuring glance, subtle but firm, as if to say, "Everything is under control." The general, growing desperate, started pacing and shouting. "Do you think your reputation intimidates me?" he barked. "I'm the authority here." But the more he shouted, the more the crowd realized the imbalance. His aggression was overcompensation. His arrogance had blinded him to the reality that this man didn't need to fight to command respect. Chuck finally spoke, his voice calm, deliberate, and measured. "It is not power that earns respect. It is restraint, discipline, and integrity. Anyone can raise a hand, but not everyone can hold themselves in the face of provocation." The general froze, caught mid-gesture, as the weight of those words sank in. Some soldiers instinctively stepped back, acknowledging the truth in Chuck's message. The crowd, now fully aware of his identity, held its breath. The scale of the confrontation had shifted completely. The narrative had changed. This was no longer an aggressive general controlling a visitor. It was a legend standing firm against unchecked arrogance. Have you ever witnessed someone stay completely calm in the face of extreme provocation? Comment below what you would do in Chuck's situation. The murmurs turned into quiet cheers as the crowd realized the brilliance of Chuck's restraint. They didn't need him to throw a punch. The mere fact that he remained composed while a general tried to assert dominance was awe-inspiring. Phones recorded every second, capturing what would soon go viral. Even the general's most loyal officers exchanged glances. They could see the shift. The whispers of Chuck Norris carried weight, legitimacy, and a reminder that sometimes the most powerful response is calm control, not violence. The general's ego wavered, but his pride refused to fully collapse yet. Chuck's subtle gaze swept across the room. Every person in that courtyard now understood. This was a man whose legend was not built on fear alone, but on skill, intelligence, and impeccable self-discipline. The tension was tangible. Even those who didn't know who he was could feel it. Something monumental was unfolding. The air seemed to hum as the general finally loosened his grip, unsure whether to let go or continue asserting himself. Chuck's eyes, calm and unwavering, silently communicated that this confrontation was far from over, but the upper hand had shifted. The crowd collectively leaned forward, mentally on edge, waiting for the moment when Chuck would finally act. Their hearts pounded. Soldiers held their breath. Cameras captured every second. And deep down, everyone watching, even outside the courtyard, would soon feel the weight of what was coming next. That Chuck's next move would not only humble the general, but leave every person present, and everyone watching online, speechless. You won't believe what he does next. The courtyard had transformed into a charged arena. Every person present, the soldiers, officers, press, and even Chuck's family, felt the tension like a physical weight pressing down on their chests. The general's grip on Chuck's hair had loosened slightly, but his pride still kept him in an aggressive posture. Chuck, meanwhile, remained calm, his presence alone commanding attention. The whispers among the crowd grew louder. It's really him, Chuck Norris. I've never seen anyone so calm under pressure. What is he going to do next? Even those who had never heard of him could sense that this was no ordinary man. His aura radiated power, patience, and mastery. Chuck's mind was as sharp as ever. He didn't need to fight to assert dominance. The general's aggression and arrogance were already working against him. Chuck knew that the true victory wasn't in striking a blow. It was in demonstrating control, intelligence, and integrity. He spoke, his voice calm but strong, carrying across the courtyard. Strength is not shown by force alone. Authority is not proven by fear. Real power is restraint, courage, and fairness. I suggest you consider your actions carefully. Every word struck the audience like a thunderclap. Soldiers straightened instinctively, pressed their phones closer to record, and even the reporters stopped typing to listen. The general's face reddened, his jaw tightening, realizing that Chuck's calmness wasn't submission, it was strategy. He tried to retort, his voice cracking with frustration. You think words can intimidate me? But Chuck didn't flinch. Instead, he took a single deliberate step closer, closing the distance not with aggression, but with silent authority. The general's hand wavered. Chuck's stance communicated everything the general needed to understand. He was in complete control. The crowd leaned forward, mentally trapped in the tension. Some whispered among themselves, no one could ever stay this calm, even in life-threatening situations. Others shook their heads in disbelief, sensing that the legend of Chuck Norris wasn't just stories. It was real, tangible, and unfolding right in front of them. Chuck then executed a subtle, strategic move. Without raising his voice or striking a blow, he twisted slightly, causing the general's own momentum to shift. The general lost balance, and the hold on Chuck's hair loosened even further. Every eye in the courtyard widened. People gasped collectively. The genius of Chuck's move wasn't physical domination. It was pure psychological mastery. His voice, calm and commanding, cut through the tension again. You see, force can intimidate temporarily. Strategy, restraint, and clarity command respect permanently. If you continue with hostility, you only reveal weakness, not strength. The general's face reflected confusion, embarrassment, and anger all at once. Soldiers exchanged glances, realizing that Chuck had turned the confrontation completely in his favor without throwing a single punch. The audience's admiration grew exponentially. Cameras captured the entire moment. Chuck's calm precision, the general's unraveling ego, and the charged reactions of every onlooker. Can you guess what Chuck will do next? Type your prediction in the comments before the reveal. You won't believe the next part. Chuck's family and friends observed quietly, their fear replaced by awe. They saw the genius of his restraint, the power of his calm, and the undeniable truth that he could dominate a room with presence alone. Even the general's closest allies couldn't hide their astonishment. The courtyard was electric. Every heartbeat, every camera shutter, every whisper added to the suspense. The general, finally realizing that brute aggression was futile, hesitated. Chuck's subtle movements, unyielding stance, and commanding words had trapped him mentally and emotionally. For the first time, he felt disempowered in front of someone who didn't fear him. Chuck stepped back just slightly, giving the general a chance to save face, but also demonstrating that he didn't need to escalate further. The tension reached its absolute peak. Every person watching, both in the courtyard and later online, felt the psychological brilliance and quiet power of the moment. In this instant, it became clear the confrontation wasn't about physical strength. It was about mind, presence, and integrity. Chuck had forced the general to reflect, to hesitate, to question his own authority, all without striking a blow. The lesson was clear for every witness. Real power lies in calm mastery, not aggression. And just when everyone thought they had reached the peak of suspense, Chuck prepared for the final, humbling move that would leave the general, the crowd, and every viewer utterly stunned. The truth about Chuck's identity is about to be revealed, and the general will be publicly humbled. You won't believe how everyone reacts. The courtyard was silent, yet the tension was almost unbearable. Every heartbeat felt louder than the last, as though the air itself had thickened. Soldiers and officers, who had been observing the confrontation in disbelief, now held their collective breath. Cameras clicked and whirred, capturing every subtle motion. And through it all, Chuck Norris stood perfectly still, calm, composed, and in complete control. The general, still flushed with anger and embarrassment from Chuck's previous calm maneuvers, was losing his grip, literally and figuratively. The crowd could sense the shift. His attempts at intimidation were failing. The more he tried to assert dominance, the more evident it became. He had underestimated Chuck. Then, a voice rang out. A fellow officer who had just arrived on the scene, a witness to the unfolding spectacle. "Sir, don't you see who this is?" he whispered, almost breathlessly. That's Chuck Norris." For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. Soldiers whispered in astonishment. "It really is him, the legend, the man who never loses." The general, stunned, blinked rapidly, unable to comprehend what he had just heard. His face drained of color. The arrogance that had fueled his aggression vanished, replaced by shock, disbelief, and shame. Chuck's calm eyes met the general's, unflinching. His voice, low but commanding, carried across the courtyard. "I am the man you underestimated. And yet, here we are. You chose aggression over understanding. You chose force over respect. It is not too late to correct that." The effect was instantaneous. Every soldier, officer, and onlooker in the courtyard felt a mixture of awe and vindication. Even those who had never seen Chuck in action realized the gravity of the moment. The general's ego, which had been inflated with authority and pride, crumbled in front of everyone. The humiliation was palpable. He had been bested not through violence, but through sheer composure, intelligence, and presence. Phones raised higher, capturing every second. Reporters whispered excitedly into microphones. "This is unbelievable. Everyone, watch carefully." Chuck Norris, the man who needs no introduction, just turned a confrontation into a lesson in humility. Chuck's family, finally allowed closer by security, watched in awe. They saw not only his physical composure, but the way his calm and strategic brilliance mentally dismantled the general. His presence alone had turned the tide. The soldiers who had once feared the general now looked to Chuck with admiration. Every person present understood. This was a masterclass in restraint, dignity, and controlled power. The general, realizing the enormity of his mistake, tried to regain composure, but the room had already shifted. Every pair of eyes was on him, silently judging, silently acknowledging the error of underestimating Chuck. The whispers of Chuck's identity were no longer subtle. They were loud, proud, and unanimous. How would you react if you witnessed someone disrespected like this? Comment below your thoughts. We want the craziest and most honest reactions. Chuck stepped forward, not aggressively, not to gloat, but to set an example. He extended a hand, not to strike, but as a gesture of mercy, respect, and teaching. Respect is not given because of fear. It is earned through integrity, calm, and understanding. Learn from this moment. The crowd erupted in cheers. Soldiers clapped, reporters captured every reaction, and some even wiped tears from their eyes. The general's humiliation was total, but Chuck's lesson was clear. True strength comes not from force, but from mastery of self and strategy. The energy in the courtyard was electric. The audience felt mentally and emotionally trapped in awe, mesmerized by the spectacle, inspired by the calm brilliance, and utterly stunned by the unfolding of events. Every recording, every whisper, every stunned gaze would become a story retold countless times, spreading Chuck's message of respect, patience, and true power worldwide. The general stepped back, finally releasing his hold completely, a silent acknowledgement of Chuck's superiority. No words could erase the embarrassment, but Chuck didn't need to taunt. The humility of his demeanor was enough to cement the lesson. In the following minutes, the crowd slowly began to disperse, but the energy lingered. Soldiers discussed among themselves what they had witnessed. Reporters shared the footage on their cameras. The story was already beginning to spread beyond the courtyard. And in every person's mind, one thought lingered. This was not just a confrontation. This was a demonstration of mental dominance, strategic brilliance, and respect earned through calm authority. As Chuck walked away, every eye followed him. Cameras recorded every step, and as the scene faded into the distance, one thing was certain. The internet would soon explode with clips, comments, and discussions about how Chuck Norris had humiliated a general without a single punch, using only intelligence, restraint, and presence. The aftermath of this confrontation went viral worldwide, inspiring millions and cementing Chuck's legendary status. You won't believe how the story spreads and how people react globally. The courtyard had emptied, but the energy lingered like electricity in the air. Soldiers, officers, reporters, and onlookers walked away in stunned silence, each replaying the events in their minds. Phones and cameras buzzed non-stop as everyone captured the confrontation, knowing instinctively that this moment was not just remarkable, it was legendary. Within hours, the footage began to circulate online. Clips of Chuck Norris standing calmly while a furious general grabbed him by the hair spread across social media. The hashtag Chuck Norris confrontation began trending worldwide, drawing millions of views, comments, and shares. People everywhere were mesmerized, not just by the confrontation itself, but by the way Chuck handled it with restraint, intelligence, and unmatched presence. News outlets picked up the story. Headlines screamed, "Chuck Norris humiliates general without lifting a finger." Legendary calm. How Chuck Norris turned aggression into awe. Military confrontation becomes viral lesson in respect. Viewers around the world were captivated. From New York to Manila, London to Sydney, people discussed the mental mastery, strategic brilliance, and emotional intelligence Chuck had displayed. Social media comment sections overflowed with praise. "I've never seen someone handle aggression so perfectly. This is a masterclass in respect and restraint." He didn't fight, yet he won completely. Even prominent influencers and motivational figures shared their admiration. Clips of the event were dissected frame by frame. People marveled at the subtle movements, the calm gaze, and the silent authority Chuck radiated. Some posted reaction videos, expressing awe at how someone could command respect without aggression, proving that true strength often lies in restraint and presence rather than force. Meanwhile, the general faced immediate consequences for his actions. Military leadership, seeing the viral footage and public reaction, reviewed his conduct. His attempt to assert dominance through aggression had backfired, and he was reprimanded for his unprofessional behavior. The humiliation, now permanent through countless online videos, served as a stark reminder. Underestimating calm intelligence is a costly mistake. Back in the courtyard, Chuck's family watched the online reaction unfold. Messages, shares, and viral clips poured in from around the globe. They saw the admiration and respect he had earned, not through combat, not through fame, but through wisdom, patience, and moral authority. Chuck remained humble, speaking only to reinforce a simple but powerful lesson. Respect cannot be demanded through force. Strength is not shown through anger. True power comes from discipline, calmness, and integrity. That is what makes someone truly unstoppable. People commented in droves, inspired, and mentally captivated. Thousands shared their own stories of encounters with arrogance or aggression, reflecting on how Chuck's calm approach could have changed their outcomes. Every like, share, and comment amplified the lesson. Respect earned through mastery of self resonates louder than intimidation or force ever could. If you believe respect should be earned through integrity, type Chuck Power in the comments and share this story with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe for more unbelievable, jaw-dropping stories like this one. The story's reach continued to grow. Social media platforms were flooded with clips, analysis, and discussions. Influencers, motivational speakers, and educators referenced the encounter as a prime example of mental strength and emotional mastery. Even months later, the videos were still being circulated, dissected, and admired worldwide. Chuck's message had traveled far beyond the courtyard. Millions had witnessed the humbling of arrogance, the triumph of composure, and the undeniable impact of presence and restraint. The viral moment wasn't just entertainment. It was a life lesson, a reminder that, in the face of aggression or intimidation, calm, intelligent, and morally grounded action wins every time. And so, as the world watched and shared, Chuck Norris walked away, not as a fighter in the traditional sense, but as a teacher of respect, patience, and true power. Every viewer, soldier, and onlooker carried a piece of that lesson forward. The viral video ended, but the lesson remained. Strength without aggression, power without cruelty, and respect earned through integrity. This is the way of a true legend.